Welcome to this new episode of the Teachers of Europe podcast. This is a podcast to support teachers across Europe in addressing common classroom challenges and featuring educators that can inspire others to follow in their footsteps. The podcast has its home on the European School Education Platform, a European Union platform for schools funded by the Erasmus Plus program. My name is Benjamin Hertz, and I'm your host for this episode. Now, our topic for today are democratic schools, and to understand a bit how much democracy is actually possible in schools. In a time when democratic institutions are really on the defensive around the world, teaching our students about the value of democracy and empowering them to become engaged in democratic processes is becoming more and more important. But how do we do that best? Is it something that we can just teach in a classroom in the same way as we teach maths or biology? Or is it something that students need to experience firsthand through democratic cultures and active participation in a school's decision-making processes? Now, democratic schools try to do exactly that. They give students decision-making powers for as many things possible in a school's daily life. But how does this actually work? And is it realistic to become fully democratic in a school? What are the daily dynamics for students and teachers in such an environment? And what are the challenges in such a setup? And what can those of us who work in more traditional schools learn from teachers and students and the experiences of democratic schools? Now, these are just some of the questions we will explore today, and I'm super happy to welcome two guests from the Democratic School X in Berlin, also known as DSX, to this episode today. We have with us Justus Pettifar, who's a 13-year-old student at the DSX, and we have with us Stella Serger, who's a teacher and mentor at the DSX. Welcome to both of you, and many thanks for joining us. Justus, can you briefly introduce yourself? Just tell us a bit where you're from, what grade you're in, how long you've attended the DSX, anything that you want to share.
Of course. Hi, my name is Justus Pettifar. I'm a student at the Democratic School X since 1.5 years now. I come from Berlin. I was born here. I was previously at a Steiner school, also in Berlin. But yeah, 1.5 years ago, I swapped back to here.
Many thanks, Justus. Thanks for joining us again. And you, Stella, can you give us a quick sense of who you are and your time at the DSX?
Yeah, I'm Stella Serger. I'm a staff member, that's what we call it, here at the school since almost 4 years. I also used to go to a democratic school as a student, so I know kind of both perspectives, and yeah, really happy to now be able to work here.
Now, let's jump right into it. And let me start with you, Stella. I'm sure it's a question you get a lot, but can you maybe briefly explain what is the Democratic School X and how does it differ from a more traditional school?
What makes us and other democratic schools in Europe and across the world different is usually two main things. One is freedom of learning, so that we don't have a curriculum where we decide what the students should learn, but it's up to the students to decide how they want to learn, what they want to learn, with whom they want to learn, what materials and media they want to use in their learning journey, and that they are trusted in that process, and that we see ourselves as supporters in the student's journey, but not. That's also why I don't call myself a teacher, because I don't think I have a set of knowledges that I need to pass on, but I'm accompanying the students in their journey. And the other element, why it's also called the democratic school, is because the school itself, the community, is run democratically, meaning that all the students, like each student and each staff member, has a vote in the school assembly that meets twice a week. We discuss all the rules and the budget, what things are spent on, what big trips we might do, or what new workshops might happen at the school. The rules are also enforced democratically by the students. So the students can volunteer to be judges in what we call the Justice Committee. And there we collectively talk about why the rules are important and might also give consequences. Another important part about our school, not all schools have that, is that we staff members are elected once a year. So just as a politician might not know whether they can be in parliament next term, I also only know at the beginning of every school year that I'm re-elected to work here. But that also means that I know that I'm really wanted here, and that all my interactions with the students is because they choose me as their mentor or as their support person.
Wow, that's really fascinating, and I'm really curious to understand more about the dynamics that some of these institutional setups bring to the fore. So let's explore that in a moment. But before we do that, I'd like to hear from you, Justus. Can you describe a bit what a typical school day looks like for you? Maybe picking up some of the elements that Stella mentioned, like these assemblies and this justice committee.
Well, I usually come to school around, I don't know, 9 or 10. It differs between the different weekdays, but usually I spend a lot of time in lessons. Yeah, around late morning and afternoon. And around like midday, I usually go to the Justice Committee because I'm a judge there too. Yeah.
Okay, can I just ask, you talked about you going to lessons. What does that mean? If this is all about you directing your own learning, what does that actually look like?
There are lessons where staff members are in a room and anyone who wants to join can join on a specific topic that is written out as name of that lesson there. Usually takes about 1 hour.
And maybe I can add that we have very traditional subject as well. Like we have a history class, for example, but the classes, or we actually call them more like offerings, can also be very different than what you would expect at a state school. For example, Justus right now should actually be in the electronic music class or a workshop. I used to do one where we just watched children's news together with the younger kids and then talked about it. And that was kind of our format. We also have a lot of creative things, or maybe also languages. That there was a time where students wanted to learn Arabic, so we had an Arabic weekly class. There's a lot of variety in what might happen.
And if I understand right, the students then decide themselves if they want to attend these lessons. And does that also, I mean, are there separations between age groups, or how does the dynamic there?
To the age groups, we have different lessons for different age groups, but basically everyone can go where they want and what they think is best for them at their learning status.
Yeah, like we don't say this is maths for 10th graders or something. We just say it's math beginners and advanced, and in the middle, and the students find out themselves where they think they're best challenged, but not over challenged.
And then how does that work? Justus, what's your experience? I mean, is it very fluid? Does it work very well? Do the students take the right decisions in a way? What's your experience of this dynamic?
I think it works very well like this. I think it's a good decision to just let everyone decide themselves where to go and what to do there. I mean, they don't have to learn anything they don't want to learn, and they can just focus on things they think are good for them and they think they need and want to learn.
And what elements of the DSX experience do you particularly like, and what elements do you particularly dislike, maybe as well?
I would say there's nothing I dislike particularly. I mostly like playing the drums in the music room, taking lessons like maths or history and sport, mostly.
Stella, can you describe what a typical school day looks like for you from the staff member perspective?
Yeah, I think of course, all days are different, but in general, or at least every Monday is different than a Tuesday. But overall, I would say my work kind of consists of 3 parts. One is the more scheduled interactions, so what you could call lessons. I cover different subjects or different topics, and I have arrangements with students to regularly meet on a certain weekday to practice something with them because they ask me to. So that's part of my work here, to give these lessons or support these learning spaces. Maybe it could also be that once a week I'm always in the creative room and I just help students there with their projects. The other part is more school management, so helping with the public relations, making sure all the materials are in stock and so on. And all of these things are also something that we find important, that it's staff members doing them and that students can participate. They're usually organized in committees. So I'm, for example, on the public relations committee, meaning that me, but also students can work on the school's Instagram page and organize open houses. And yeah, the transparency and the invitation to the students to participate and also learn a lot in those elements of running a school collectively is really important. And then I also make sure I have unscheduled time where I'm available for the students, either for one-on-one mentorship conversations, but also to play board games, make sure I walk around in the garden, seeing that everybody's safe. Kind of these informal interactions we also really value at the school.
And do you have like a defined timetable, or do you also have freedom in sort of setting a timetable for yourself?
So we have quite a structured timetable because now we have 100 students. I think smaller schools tend to be more open to see what the day brings. But in our case, it's just established itself that it's easier to not always have to reestablish everything. So I have my lessons that are set every week, and I also have meetings with the different committees, and then in between kind of intentionally free time to see what else is needed.
And are there any things that you particularly like or dislike at the DSX from your perspective as a staff member?
Yeah, so what I really like about working at a democratic school is kind of the intentionality of the interactions, knowing that, I was chosen by the students to work here. And whenever a student comes to my lesson, it's not because they just have to be there or because somebody else told them to be there, but because they choose to spend their time with me. And that just makes the kind of collective learning so much more pleasurable than having to force something upon them. And also that I have a lot of freedom in deciding what I think the school needs from me, what projects I want to work on, what I want to initiate. I think what can be challenging also is that the kind of flip side of that, meaning that I can't force students to do something that I'm really excited about. So sometimes I have an idea about something, let's say an art technique that I want to practice in the workshop, and I am looking for students who would be interested, and just nobody wants to join. And I think working at a democratic school, you have to be very humble that it's not your great ideas and your great knowledge that matters, but really being open to the students' interests, even if they might be different from what you think is important sometimes.
And what are the dynamics like between teachers and students? If you get elected by the students, do you feel that sort of influences your relationship and the way you respond to the students in any way?
I mean, I don't feel judged, or I don't feel like I have to campaign to be reelected. I think the students collectively make very, very smart decisions, and also don't just think about their own perspective, but also what the school might need in general. I just feel like we are on the same level, even though they have that decision power. I think the fact that they chose me to then be there in our interactions, I can also feel like I trust in them giving me feedback when they're unhappy with something I did, when they feel like I'm trying to manipulate them into learning something, or maybe give feedback that they didn't actually ask for. Then I also trust that they see it as their responsibility to give me good feedback instead of just, for example, gossiping behind my back, which I think is something that happens a lot at state schools because the students feel powerless in changing anything, so they just complain between each other.
Justus, both of you have mentioned sort of trust and responsibility a lot. How do you think your school experience prepares you for the future when you leave the DSX?
I think as long as I choose the educational way and not the way of freedom and free time, just chilling around at school, it will bring me up to getting a degree, and then also continuing to a higher school to be ready for grown-up life.
But are there particular elements of your experience at DSX which you feel prepare you better for that than maybe you would experience at a traditional school?
I think at a traditional school, at state schools, you're pushed around a lot. You're told to do this and that, and you don't really experience of how it is to make your free decisions yourself. Yeah, which is a big part of life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can I quickly ask a question to Justus?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I was just curious because you're a judge in the school in the Justice Assembly, and you spend a lot of your time there. So I'm sure also a lot of learning happens there.
Yeah.
And I'm curious what you would say you're learning there, also maybe for your life.
I think that you learn there that it is important to decide equally between any people, if German, if not German, if black, if not black, if anything, you have to equally be with them, decide equally between them.
So like the dealing with the school rights kind of helps you to appreciate rights in general.
Yeah.
Okay.
Stella, how do students from the DSX or from democratic schools in general experience that transition into more traditional educational settings or higher education?
I mean, it's very hard to generalize, of course. All our students are so different and they might struggle with different things. But I guess I can also speak from my own experience, or what I see often is because they then also choose to go to a different school and are very intentional about why they're going there, that they want a specific degree and so on. I think they do quite well, even if it means, for example, accepting authority that they otherwise aren't used to from our school. Oftentimes they're quite excited to learn and to be able to specialize, because that's a bit of also a downside of a small school. Sometimes then you end up being the only one who is really interested in astrophysics, and you can still spend all day reading books, but then you might be able to go to university and talk to 20 other people who are also really excited about that. And that's something I also oftentimes, I thought it in myself and others, there's also some disappointment because we've learned to love learning, but other students not always have that. So then ending up in a class where many people don't care that much about really understanding an issue, but just want to pass the next exam, for example, can be quite frustrating. I think also, for example, I always had to understand why I write an assignment and felt like it had to be connected to a real world issue or something. And I was quite perfectionist because I was just used to everything I do being because I think this is the most important thing to do in that moment. And in school, that's not how most assignments look like than at university, for example. So I had to give that up a bit and just sometimes do things because I needed to do them to move on.
And are these kind of issues that you've just outlined, are they being addressed directly with the students at DSX, as in preparatory conversations about what comes afterwards, or anything like that happening?
Yeah, so I think we always offer ourselves as in our mentorship talks, but we also have a committee that's kind of responsible for the transition. They also offer students to find internships if they're interested in that. And all of our students do at least one internship during their school time. And then also talk about things like, perfectionism, exam anxiety, because basically all students choose to kind of return to a more generalized system. And then we want to make sure they're not overwhelmed by it, by slowly prepared for it.
Can we delve a bit more into some of the sort of dynamics and methods that are being used? In particular, Stella, you mentioned at the beginning the assembly. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Yeah, how is this shared decision-making being implemented on a daily life?
Yeah, so if a student wants to change something about the school, for example, let's say they want a trampoline for the garden, they can write a proposal for the school assembly. Ideally, it would be very concrete, and maybe they would ask for help in researching how expensive that would be and if there's any safety concerns that need to be taken care of. And then that proposal gets put on the agenda of the school assembly, so everybody beforehand can see if an issue that concerns them, that they're interested in, will be discussed and show up for that discussion. And then anybody can say their arguments for or against spending money on a trampoline, for example, and then we vote, and kind of the majority decides that. And the same goes for school rules. Let's say a big issue always is how how cell phones can be used or how media is used in the school. So that's also decided by the school assembly.
Justus, and what's your experience of these dynamics? Do the students campaign with each other, lobby each other, try to influence each other? What's your experience of these decision-making processes?
Well, usually all the campaigning and influencing is done during the school assembly when everyone is allowed to talk, of course, after each other, but yeah, everyone's allowed to talk. Different points of view get told, and at the end there's a vote, and whatever decision is done by the majority of people wins.
And it doesn't create any sort of bad feelings if your proposal is voted down? I mean, have you experienced any sort of problems between students coming up as a result of that?
Not yet. I think probably has happened before, but not in the time I was here.
And probably if it happens, if I understand right, then it is passed on to the Justice Committee, which then addresses this. Can you tell us a bit more about the Justice Committee and the dynamics? You've mentioned you're a judge there. What does that actually mean in the day-to-day?
Well, if you notice somebody breaking a rule, hurting anyone, or, saying annoying things, then you can write a complaint, and that gets into the Justice Committee then. And the judges decide which complaint comes next, and then it's basically like in the school assembly. It gets discussed, the rules get nominated which could have been broken, and then you have consequence options, like options for consequences, and then the judges vote, and it's, again, the majority wins.
Great, thank you. Let's go back to the idea of the self-directed learning. Justus, how do you decide in your day when you come in the morning to the school what it is you want to learn? How do you take those decisions? Is it just, okay, I feel like this today? Or do you have like a bit of a plan looking ahead of where you want to be at the end of the year?
Well, I personally have written myself a plan for what to do when, but sometimes I just also come to school and spontaneously decide what to do. Of course, there is a scheduled time when different offerings are and when not. But yeah, I usually have a plan.
And Stella, how do you support students, for example, with developing such a plan? Or maybe more generally, how do you support students who really struggle with this very self-directed approach?
I just make sure I know when they're struggling. So I try to, with the students that chose me as their mentor, to have regular check-ins to see how they're doing, if there's anything they're unsatisfied with. And then especially the young kids often do tell me, I'd like to go to this reading and writing space more often, but I always miss it because I can't read the time yet, or I just get too caught up playing, and then I realize it's already happened. So then it could be a solution to talk to the staff members who are doing that space, to notify the students when it's about to start. They don't have to manage their own time yet. They have time to learn that. I just make sure that all the school opportunities are visible to them, because there's a lot happening and a lot possible. So I talk through the different offerings and explain to them what can be done there, so they can actually make an informed decision how they want to spend their time. But sometimes it's also that students struggle because the parents are building pressure on them, and then they're kind of in a conflict where what they want to do is actually play football all day, but they constantly have this feeling of my parents are going to ask me tonight what I did in school, and if I tell them I play football, they're going to be disappointed, so I have to go to that math class, but actually I really don't want to. And I think that kind of inner conflict oftentimes distances the students from their intrinsic motivation. So if I sense that kind of dynamic, I actually work more with the parents in trying to let go and giving the child the space to maybe spend another half a year playing football, because they just need to arrive at the school first and make friends and feel safe and stable. And then they'll also start getting annoyed by not being able to be independent through reading and writing. And then it will be their time to participate in those elements of the school. So I find that also important.
And can you say a bit more about the relationship with parents? How do you interact with them? I mean, in this scenario that you were just describing, I guess you just write them an email or call them. Are there regular conversations with parents, like scheduled conversations? Are they involved in any type of plan that the students prepare for themselves? And can you say a bit more about the way the parents play a role in the school life?
In one ways, we try to ensure that the students feel like it's their space and that their parents are not visibly or invisibly constantly present at the school. But of course, we understand that the parents also have concerns, and we try to keep them informed so they can always talk to their child's mentor. And we do have maybe every semester kind of check-in conversations with the parents, where also the students can be present if they want to. Of course, if there's an issue with the student, then we work really closely with the parents. And I sometimes have weekly meetings with a parent about something specific if that's necessary. Something we do is that every 3 months we have kind of we call them open space days. We have them once a month, but the specific open space day means that there's just no regular lessons are taking place, but it's an open space that especially the students can fill. But on those days, it can also be the parents coming in and giving workshops. I usually organize like a professional panel where the parents can talk about their professional experiences and how they found their way in this messy world. And that can be really nice for the students as well.
What's the role of assessment in the DSX or in democratic schools in general? Are there tests, grades, or some kind of formal evaluations taking place, or does that just not exist?
Well, in 9th class, you can decide before, but in 9th class, you should decide what to do after school if you want to do a degree. And if you do, you have to start learning and also doing exams, like test exams.
And how do you generally feel about, are you getting graded all the time? Or do you get feedback when you want it? Or
if you ask for feedback, you get it, but you don't get graded at all unless you want it.
Yeah, so we have this really important principle that we don't give unwanted feedback. So, for example, when a student has written a short story and they show it to me, then I won't assume that they're showing it to me because they want to hear anything from me. I just assume they want to show it to me. And then I ask them, why are you showing it to me? Do you want to hear anything about this? And I don't assume that they want to have all their spelling mistakes corrected, because maybe that's not why they wrote the story. Maybe they more want feedback on the story arc or the characters, and then I comment on that. So it's really important that, feedback isn't just forced upon the students, but that they're opening the space for that. Of course, if they do decide to want kind of a formal 9th or 10th grade diploma, they can do that at a partner school of ours, or they can take exams at a different school. And then we also give them the opportunity to practice those scenarios. And then we also give them the opportunity to be graded on those criteria so that they know what they're getting into. Instead of having kind of a scorecard at the end of a year, what we do give the students is a personal letter, oftentimes with a lot of pictures. And it's really just for the students to have something to reflect on their past school years and to be able to remember it in the future.
Great, thank you. Let's come to maybe a message you want to send out to our audience. This podcast is for teachers across Europe. I would say most of them are in quite traditional schools. Justus, what do you think teachers in traditional schools could learn from democratic schools? If you would have a message for teachers in other schools, based on your experience of the democratic school, what would it be?
I would probably say it isn't healthy to push students into learning, because that can be very pressuring and depressing too in some cases.
Okay, thank you. That's a clear message. Stella, what about you? What advice would you give to our audience of teachers who want to incorporate democratic principles into their classrooms? They might not be working in a democratic school, but they like the idea. They agree with a lot of the principles and values that are being incorporated in democratic schools, but they just have their own classroom to work in. What can they do? Yeah,
I know it's very hard to kind of find that space within kind of rigid system, but I'm sure these spaces exist. Maybe, for example, you could start with the element of the justice assembly, what we have. So when there's conflicts in the class or kind of figuring out how to deal with rules being broken, maybe that could be a start for a democratic setup. So have a classroom court, or just defining a very clear but maybe limited area of power for the students. So give them maybe a small budget that they can freely decide over, or maybe 2 hours a week that they can freely decide over. I just think it's important to be actually clear about how far the power can go and where the limits are, and then actually be open to the results. Because I think sometimes it happens that their students are invited to participate in decision making, but then their voices are not actually impacting the decisions, and then they get more frustrated. I think oftentimes the students actually don't, because they're not used to being asked to what they want, they oftentimes don't know it first, or they don't realize the extent to which they might be able to change something. So also trying to find a democratic school in the area to visit with your class, I think could also be a great starting point for these conversations, and to kind of allow their fantasy to start growing.
Excellent. I think 2 very powerful messages to our audience, and I'm sure we will have some teachers out there in Europe who are inspired by this and will take some of these ideas forward. So many thanks to both of you. I think it's been a very interesting conversation. We've explored the different dynamics, the different structures that we can find in democratic schools, and I think there's a lot of food for thought there for teachers across Europe to take forward into their own classrooms, into their own schools. Any other final words from either of you?
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting us. I personally have learned quite a lot today from Stella, funnily enough. Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been a very nice time.
Excellent. Thank you, Justus.
Yes, and one thing, I can also recommend to people now interested learning more about democratic education to go to the yearly conference organized by the Democratic Education Community, also called UDEC. This year, it's actually going to be together with the International Democratic Education Conference, and it will take place in August in Belgium. And I think it will be a great opportunity to talk to people all over the world about their experiences with democratic education.
Excellent. Yes, and we'll make sure to link in the show notes to the conference, and also, of course, to the website of the DSX and any other useful resources. More generally, if you want to find out more about how to foster active citizenship and democracy in schools, make sure to also browse through many of the resources about active citizenship on the European School Education Platform. And also keep an eye out for professional development opportunities coming up. For example, we have an online course launching on 10th of February about students designing their own learning spaces. And we actually recently ran a webinar about enabling children's rights to be heard in education with Laura Lundy, who's a co-director of the Center for Children's Rights, which can still be accessed via the recording. And of course, make sure to keep an eye out for the next episode, where we will be focusing on a very different topic, but also interesting. It's going to be the topic of metacognition and self-regulated learning in the classroom. With that, I close the episode. A big thanks again to Justus and Stella for joining us, and see you on the next episode.